Great. Okay, so let's get started. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us on today's webinar, Increasing Practice Profitability with the Essential E-Commerce Bookkeeping Checklist. I'm your host, Jeffrey Golano. I'm the head of marketing at A2X, but I've been a part of the cloud accounting industry for about 5 years, either directly or indirectly. So I was the head of marketing at HubDoc, which was a cloud accounting app that was acquired by Xero in 2018. And I've done some consulting work for other accounting apps in the space over the last 2 years. I'm joined, that said, by two very magnanimous expert partners, Brittany Brown and Juliet Aurora. Brittany Brown, CEO of Ledger Gurus, one of the top e-commerce bookkeeping practices in the United States. And Juliet Aurora, conversingly, CEO of AIS Solutions, one of the top e-commerce bookkeeping practices in Canada. And also, was it the 2017 or 2018 Firm of the Future winner?
2017.
2017.
Hard to believe it was almost 5 years ago, but yeah, 2017.
I remember, and I was there when that was announced, so that's awesome. And we're also joined by industry vet Joe Carruth, Director of Services at Carbon. But before we get started, I provided a little bit of an overview about kind of my journey into cloud accounting, but I'd love to hear from the group here how you not only got into bookkeeping, but also specifically e-commerce bookkeeping. So I'll start off by passing the mic over to Brittany, and then we can go to Juliet and then Joe.
Yeah, so we started our firm about 7 years ago, and we've been on a pretty rapid growth curve. We have about 60 employees now, and it was about 4 years ago that we decided to focus on e-commerce accounting. And the timing of that was really great because so much of the world went to e-commerce after COVID, and it's been quite a journey. There's been a large learning curve involved with it, but also a lot of growth and a lot of opportunity. And I feel like it's a great practice, a great niche to be in, because there is so much opportunity, and it's clearly where the future is going, honestly.
Awesome. And Juliet?
So I have been in business since 2000. I'm really dating myself here. I've been in the cloud since 2010, and we kind of ventured into the e-commerce space because my husband used to own a retail store with an e-commerce component. And we found how much of a challenge it was for him, that the thought of other e-commerce sellers that are out there trying to navigate their way through when they didn't have a Juliet Aurora standing there saying, no, that's not the way you do it. So that's kind of why we jumped into it, because we could come at it from both the bookkeeping and accounting side, but also the business owner side, because we knew what the business owners were going through because we've been through it ourselves.
Awesome. And Joe?
Yeah, so I've been in the cloud accounting space since 2011. So I started out out of college as a bookkeeper and payroll specialist, and worked my way up through the ranks as president of a firm and a managing director of another. Our first firm was actually, I think, the first Firm of the Future in 2015 or 2016 back in the day. We were kind of early, like Juliet and Brittany, in the cloud space. So had a fun ride over there. I've been at Carbon a little over a year. Just have a love of technology. I love process. I love the bookkeeping world, and I always geek out on good technology. So I've come from the space of manually doing journal entries to try to match, point of sale data. So A2X is up there on the list of very cool tech that saves a bunch of time. So glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to the three of you for joining us. The topic that we're covering in this webinar, I think, is incredibly important, but B, just the amount of experience that we have across the three of you, I think is going to be incredibly valuable as we go through the content, but then also give folks who have joined us an opportunity to ask any questions. And hopefully we can answer all of them before the end of the webinar. I'll get into a little bit of the housekeeping notes. So as you can see, we are using Zoom to deliver this webinar. There is a chat function so that you can communicate with us directly or through Q&A. I'm going to be moderating the questions throughout the webinar. So if they fit within the flow of conversation, I'm going to try to bring them in for either Juliet, Brittany, or Joe as we move forward. And if not, we're going to try to answer as many questions as possible at the end of the webinar to make sure that everyone feels like they had their voices heard. The other thing is we will be sending the recording of the webinar as well as the actual downloadable checklists to your email as a follow-up. I did go ahead and send the checklists preemptively, so you should have that in your inbox. So please feel free to follow along. But if not, don't worry, everything is going to get sent to your inbox. We're not so concerned with timing. Like our goal here is to deliver value. So if this ends up being a little bit shorter than an hour, or a little bit longer than an hour, we're gonna give it the time it needs. But know that, if you have to jump off at any point in time, we're gonna send you that recording. Now onto the topic of today's conversation. So first and foremost, we're gonna spend a little bit of time going through the why. So why you should consider implementing an e-commerce bookkeeping checklist and the value that can provide to your practice as well as your clients. We're then going to dive deep into one part of the bookkeeping checklist. So this is a pretty robust asset that goes through weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annual processes. And we could have spent the whole webinar, maybe even a few hours, going through the checklist in totality. We're going to focus in on a weekly process just to give you an idea of how it works and how you can customize it to fit the needs of your practice. And then in addition to that, we'll take a sneak peek at one of the monthly processes that are specific to e-commerce, and then really get to hear from the expertise of Juliet and Brittany. And then before we get into the Q&A phase, we're going to go through some best practices when implementing your processes. What's incredibly interesting is that although more and more businesses, and especially practices, are implementing their accounting and bookkeeping processes, there's still some challenges in terms of getting kind of team alignment, buy-in, and repeatability. And we're really lucky to have Joe here on the webinar to provide some best practices that he's experienced at Carbon after supporting hundreds, if not, I'm assuming hundreds or thousands of practices. Joe, what would you say?
Thousands, yeah.
Yeah, thousands. I would have underguessed, sorry. Okay, great. So let's talk about the why. And the why is we're going to start less specifically than the processes and talk about e-commerce as a whole. And then we'll try to feed in why processes specifically for e-commerce is incredibly important. So as Brittany was mentioning, COVID obviously created a boom in e-commerce, but that boom was actually on an upward trajectory even before. I think it just expedited a lot of that growth. But did you know that by 2024, retail e-commerce sales are likely going to surpass $5.5 trillion, and that e-commerce will account for a fifth of all retail sales globally, so 22% of retail sales. This segment, although, again, as mentioned, a lot of the growth got sped up because of COVID, is still on an upward trajectory and is going to be taking more and more and more of retail over time. The net result of that is that e-commerce bookkeeping is likely going to become one of the fastest growing niche for many practices. In fact, at A2X, we're seeing that happen today. And I'd love for Brittany to jump in and provide some perspective here, because I'm assuming that's what happened precisely at Ledger Gurus based on your introduction.
Yeah, so when we first started our practice, we started this practice because, we focused on e-commerce several years into our practice because we saw the growing opportunity there. And I don't know that I know really any friends that I know who work with clients, own firms, who do not have at least one e-commerce client, and most of them are kind of growing. And I keep my fingers really close and my ears really close to my friends that own e-commerce focused accounting firms like Juliet and others as well. And most of us are having trouble with capacity to just be able to bring on all the clients that need our help and need our assistance. Furthermore, on the other side of it, I see the other side of it as well, because we actually just bought an e-commerce business, Ledger Gurus did. And it was like it's like the real estate market right now. Trying to buy a business was as aggressive and as competitive as the real estate market is right now in most parts of the US at least. And so unquestionably, this is an area that offers huge opportunity, not only for the sellers who are in the space, but also for all vendors who are supporting this particular business type.
Awesome. I'm going to pause because I just have a question. It's more so out of curiosity. What type of business, and more of a passion project, or
yeah, so
your own champagne?
we bought a business that's an Italian skincare line. And the reason we bought it is because we wanted to be able to understand what our clients were going through from a operational perspective. We get a lot of questions from our clients, especially around things like inventory management and forecasting, and how do we fund our revenue, our inventory purchases and stuff like that. And we just, having never gone through it ourselves, we're limited in our ability to speak to it. And so that's really what it was about for us, was being able to understand in a more holistic way all of the issues that our clients are facing.
That's brilliant. That's awesome. So I think, like, when we think about the growing segment of e-commerce businesses looking for accounting and bookkeeping partners, it kind of makes sense, right? They're fast-paced organizations, a lot of transactions, a lot of inventory, and a lot of complexity as it relates to accounting and bookkeeping. So, like, those are usually the areas in which people with expertise in the space can provide a ton of value. Juliet, do you mind digging in a little bit into some of the tangible, tactical pieces of value that accountants and bookkeepers are providing to their e-commerce sellers?
Absolutely. So even in general, not even specific to e-commerce bookkeeping, you already understand how important accurate numbers mean to your clients. If you now layer in the complexity of e-commerce, it's a whole different ballgame. Not only are there complexities around tax, if you think about, most business owners have a hard time understanding, what their tax and their compliance requirements are when they're only dealing in one state or province. Now they're selling their product and service across multiple states, multiple provinces, sometimes multiple countries. There's no way that they're able to do that effectively and as well be able to manage their business. So you, as an e-commerce bookkeeping professional, if you're able to add in that extra layer of knowledge for them, it gives them huge confidence in what it is that they're doing in the back end so that they can focus on growing their business. So confidence and compliance, if you don't understand what the taxes are that they're supposed to be paying, maybe they're overpaying, maybe they're underpaying, and then there's some risk there. So you're able to mitigate that for them as well. Probably the strongest one, though, for our clients is the final one that's on this slide, which is better performance visibility. For our clients, especially if they're selling across multiple channels, probably the biggest question we're always asked is, what is my most profitable channel? So if you're able to give them some insights about how they're selling, what products are profitable for them, what channels are most profitable for them, you become invaluable to their business.
Absolutely. I find it interesting, and forgive me, since I've only kind of been in this world for the past few months, but one of the things that I see a lot of e-commerce sellers do or are doing from an accounting perspective is a lot of them are on cash accounting, and they're looking to accounting and bookkeeping partners to transition them over to accrual to help provide that level of visibility that you're talking about, Juliet. Is that something that you're seeing quite a bit of, or is that kind of on the money?
So for in Canada, you have to report based on an accrual method of bookkeeping. So even if you're doing it on a cash basis for yourself, at the end of the year, at some point, you have to do it for accrual. I think it's in the US, it's a little bit different. Brittany?
Right. It kind of depends on the size of the business, and you kind of have the option to choose one or the other depending on the size of your business.
Yeah, in Canada, you don't. It's accrual. You have no choice. But the other point I forgot to mention as well is there are now a new segment of companies that have appeared out of this growing space, who actually, their entire business model is to buy other e-commerce businesses.
Aggregators.
and grow the brand. And that's all they're doing. And so and one of the things they look at is your financials. So if you're looking to help a business, or if you are a business that wants to be able to sell your e-commerce space, then you absolutely need good bookkeeping.
And it's really interesting that you say that. I was actually on a call with an aggregator a few weeks ago, and one of the things that they had mentioned, more specifically to the US, but also to Canadian businesses that aren't necessarily working with an accountant or bookkeepers, they actually like it when the seller is on cash-based accounting, because it actually negatively impacts the valuation and they can move up the business for less. So when they work with experts like yourselves, transitioning them over to accrual, like the services almost kind of pay for themselves, right? Especially for those types of businesses that are looking to sell to either buyers or aggregators that are going to grow the brand. So I just find that to be incredibly interesting. Cool. So Juliet, you talked a little bit about kind of the value of e-commerce bookkeeping and accurate financials for sellers. And then you touched on the complexity and why working with an accountant or bookkeeper or an outsourced accountant or bookkeeper can be incredibly valuable. Brittany, I'd love, if possible, for you to talk a little bit about where that complexity comes from in the world of e-commerce.
Yeah, so, and it's interesting, the comment you just made about how good accounting typically actually improves the overall profitability metrics of a business, which therefore allows them to sell at a higher price, because most, and I know this even more personally myself now having bought one, almost all purchases are based on some sort of agreement on a multiple of net income or EBITDA or profitability measurements of one kind or another, of which accrual will always favor better profitability margins. Well, not always, but almost always, especially when you're dealing with inventory and when you're dealing with e-commerce accounting. Doing it right and doing it correctly and doing accrual will always, well, not always, I guess. I should stop saying always, but almost always positively impact your profitability. So it is worth considering doing right, especially if exiting is on your horizon. So one of the reasons why e-commerce bookkeeping is fundamentally different and the complexity really factors into this is because in a typical business, and like Ledger Gurus, our firm would be a typical business, all of the activity of the business flows to the bank accounts and the credit cards. If I'm capturing all my bank account activities and I'm capturing all my credit card activities, maybe I'm considering some accrual things like what needs to be invoiced or what bills need to be accrued, I'm going to be 95% of the way there to an accurate financial picture. And I'm going to be capturing correctly most of the activity of the business. But in an e-commerce business, the activity is actually passing through the channels that you're selling on. And all you're seeing deposited into your bank account is just the net impact of a lot of activity that is happening on those channels. And so if somebody's approaching it the way they would approach just a normal business and approaching the bookkeeping and accounting that way and focusing primarily on the activities as they hit the bank accounts and credit cards, they're going to be missing a huge amount of the activity that actually happens there. Shopify is a great example of this, as is Amazon in particular. But basically what you look at is you say, if I was to take this net deposit and I was to say, I get $82,000 from Amazon and I just call that sales. Well, someone who has a relationship with Amazon is often using Amazon for their fulfillment. They're usually using Amazon to advertise on. They may even be borrowing money from Amazon. And that net deposit that hits monthly is a cumulative effect of all of that activity and all of those different relationships. So if I was a normal business and I would have a separate vendor for my marketing, I would have a separate vendor for my fulfillment, I would have a separate relationship with the lender. In this case, Amazon is literally all of those things. And you see one deposit come in. This is one of the reasons we love ADEX, is because it does a great job of making this process a lot easier. Jeff, go back 2 slides just really quick, because I just want to show this thing on the left here is basically a printout of a orders report out of, I can't tell if that's Amazon or Shopify, it looks like Amazon. But basically you end up with thousands, sometimes millions of rows, depending on how big of a business you are, that somehow you're supposed to track. I mean, it is data overload. Early on in our journey on this, we did figure out how to do this like by hand, pulling these data reports. And it was very time consuming, and it was very hard for us to teach our team, and it was very hard to make it scalable. And frankly, I didn't know this, but Excel only has like a limit of 1 million cell rows that you can even have in an Excel spreadsheet. So depending on the client and depending on how many sales they had, we literally broke Excel a couple of different times trying to do this successfully. And 8X makes this process very simple. So this is just one area where the accounting becomes very complex. Inventory will always be a very complex accounting need as well. And any business that is an e-commerce business will almost always also have an inventory component of what they're doing as well. And very, very often they will be dealing with that inventory in an environment where they don't even have their eyeballs on that inventory. Usually they're using a 3PL or they're using FBA or it's being warehoused somewhere else. And they're certainly probably outsourcing the manufacturing of that. And so there's a lot of moving pieces that they don't have a lot of visibility on, but the COGS are their single most important expense. And so that's just a couple examples of the complexity of e-commerce accounting. And so, and it only gets more complex as you sell more because you typically tend to expand in SKUs, expand on channels, expand in payment processors, expand in vendor relationships, and expand in every other way. So it only gets more complex as you go.
Which is interesting, right? Like it further, I think, validates the point that outsourced accounting and bookkeeping partners are essential to these types of businesses, because you can imagine with that complexity, and if you wanted to get the books right and you didn't really know what you were doing, like that would be an owner's full-time job to just work through all of this complexity. And they probably wouldn't even get it right in the first place, right? So that it just kind of further increases the value of the services that you provide. So very much appreciate that overview. One of the things that you had mentioned though, is like in a world before A2X, you had kind of done it manually and likely built some processes around it. What we're going to talk about here from like a process documentation perspective, it's like, it's going to be including or excluding A2X, right? It's more so about the work that needs to get done to be able to get accurate financials for these types of businesses. But because, as mentioned, bookkeeping for e-commerce isn't like your everyday small businesses, it requires a lot of patience, experience, and documentation to get it right, I would imagine. You had talked about kind of the learning curve and then doing it manually. And then when you start to bring in that expertise, Brittany, specifically when you're doing it, like to scale that across multiple people, like that's where I really feel the documentation and the processes come into play as one of the benefits of having those in place. But Joe, I'd love for you to kind of dig into it a little bit more, seeing that you've spoken to thousands of practices about, you know, the value of process. And I'm sure, as you can see with the complexity of e-commerce, why it would even have compounding value in this area.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So my department I run is our services and implementation team. We have teams all across the globe at this point, in Australia, US, and in the UK. And we talk to firms every single day. And we ask, hey, what are your processes? Where are your processes? And so many of them have said, you know, they're right here in my head. They come with me on vacation and when I'm sick, or they're on my yellow legal pad. And the reality is that just doesn't scale. And it can be very stressful as you're trying to run a business and remember all the various tasks that you have to do, whether you are an accountant or you're the individual trying to run your business. And as Jeff said, you know, there's enough of process that goes into normal small business accounting. On the e-commerce side, you are taking that one business and you're spreading it across multiple tax jurisdictions and multiple channels. And so it just becomes a very complex creature to tame. And so the reason you want to build those processes and why you want to have them documented is this list here is you cut down on errors. You're not reliant on yourself or one key staff to remember all of the things, because you know what happens if you win the lottery. Actually, that would make your day. What if a key member wins the lottery and they just go away? All those processes leave with them because they're in their head. So there is a scalability element. There is efficiency that is gained by having the processes listed out either in Excel or a tool like Carbon. It's there, it's quick to get to them. You don't have to remember, you know, where is that login and what do I have to do for this client or this jurisdiction or this channel? It's all listed out. You don't have to have that mental load on you to remember all those things. There is the increase of profitability. So typically in an accounting firm, you'll have one amazing team member that builds a process in their head or on paper, and you want to continue giving them raises and moving them up and making them into seniors because they've done all this amazing work. Every hour that they work going forward is getting more and more expensive. And they're also getting more and more burnt out on that repetition of those tasks. And so by documenting, you can train up new hires to take that work. That amazing team member of yours can go on vacation because they can hand over a checklist for someone else to manage for them. So there are a billion reasons why you want to build processes and have them well documented. This is a short list. I think this is a key list of things to be focused on and why it's so important. And it is hard to document. You know, it is hard to write it all out, especially when you're already busy. But I'm sure Brittany and Juliet can attest to, they've grown these amazing firms because they have built processes for team members to carry forward.
Absolutely. And you know, it's what's interesting, right? Like we spent quite some time talking about the complexity of e-commerce bookkeeping and why, especially for that type of work, you want to document your processes. And I feel, especially for those of you that are joining us that might be a little bit newer to the world of e-commerce bookkeeping, it might sound a little bit, I don't want to use the word scary, but cumbersome. But those are usually the areas in which there's a ton of opportunity because you already have the accounting and bookkeeping expertise, and it's just about you know, rounding it out with the e-commerce accounting and bookkeeping expertise and providing a valuable service to a segment that is in great need of it, and one in which they definitely do not believe that they can do themselves. And I can imagine, Juliet and Brittany, that you've seen that quite a bit. Like, I'm sure that there are no clients that come to your door and they're like, I'm great at this. And I just want you to validate my great work.
Definitely.
Truth. Yeah. Tears are usually expressed, some swear words, life ultimatums, wills to live have been lost. Like, definitely not confidence and joy.
A lot of our clients who started out doing their own when they started have said they should have bought stock in Advil or Tylenol because of the amount that they consumed over the period of years.
Joe mentioned something as part of the list previously, but like this idea of increasing profitability. And I put this metric here, 30% increase in profitability, because when we first started talking about kind of the power of documenting and implementing a process for e-commerce bookkeeping in other areas, obviously, Juliet and Brittany, you both mentioned that kind of the increase in profitability that you saw at your practices was close to this metric here. I'll start with Brittany. Do you mind talking to that a little bit?
Yeah, so I mean, I have to start by just confessing that I'm a process crisis. So I'm definitely not somebody who leans into processes well or embraces processes well. And so as an early founder and in the early days of our business, I was definitely a liability to the organization in my embracing of processes. And I quickly learned to surround myself with people who were completely committed to processes and were also empowered to hold me accountable to processes. And it had a huge impact on our profitability. And because we're only a 7-year-old business, I still remember the pain and the tears over the lack of processes and the way that affected our bottom line and the way that we suffered as a firm for my weaknesses, and how much better we were when people were in place who could implement, enforce, and improve processes. And a huge part of that process is documenting and understanding what that process should be, and then holding people accountable to the execution of that. So I can tell you that I sleep better at night and that we are much more profitable because the organization compensates for my weaknesses now, and that it was much better when I got out of the way of all of that.
Appreciate that candor, but incredibly helpful. Juliet, anything you want to add?
I guess for me, the starting point for processes was I'm a control freak. And so everything, when I started to bring on team members, it was my name on the door. And so everything had to go through me because nothing was documented. So everyone kind of did what they wanted. Then I would look at it, change what I wanted, and then sent it out the door. And that is the fastest way to a heart attack, to not being able to scale, to not being able to go on vacation and not have to take your laptop and your cell phone with you. And so it was when we hired a business coach, and it really was, the emphasis was on, well, you need to have some systems and processes in place so that you have a business and that you've not just created a job for yourself. And as soon as we started to do that, again, like Brittany, the profitability just changed completely.
Awesome. Well, really happy to hear, and luckily for everyone, Juliet and Brittany were incredibly generous with their time and supported us with putting together the essential e-commerce bookkeeping checklist. This is a beast of an asset / resource that you can use and customize for your own practice. It goes through, as mentioned previously, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annual individual processes. It's available as a PDF document, available as an actual Google Sheet. As mentioned previously, it's in your inbox right now, but I'll make sure that it's also in the follow-up. And for the next few slides, we're going to have Juliet and Brittany kind of deep dive into a weekly process so you can start to wrap your head around how this resource can be used. And then we're going to jump in to a preview of one of the monthly processes, which is the e-commerce portion of it. And then after that, we're going to jump in and talk about some best practices of what you can consider when implementing said process. We should have started like a drinking game with the word process, and everyone would just be like, the best webinar ever. Okay, so I'm going to pass the mic over here to Juliet to just talk about how we've put together the actual checklist itself, and how you can start to understand it as you start to dig into it for your own practice.
Sure. So the checklist is broken out, as Jeff said, by time frame. So there's a weekly section, monthly, quarterly, and annually. And then it's also broken out, because this checklist is designed not only for us as accounting bookkeeping professionals, but also for business owners. It's broken out by kind of what the responsibility would be within the organization. So there are titles, I guess, for who it would be that would actually complete this process. If you're a business owner, you're probably doing all of it yourself, so you can just ignore all the titles completely. And then what we've also done is broken it out by order of priority and broken it into phases. So throughout the document, you'll see the 1, 2, and 3 in different colors and in circles, and they tell you what order you should implement these processes. So if you don't have anything at all in place, start with the number 1s first. Don't worry about implementing 2s and 3s until you've got all your 1s solid, then move on to 2, and then move on to 3.
Fantastic. All right. Are we ready to dive in?
Sure.
Let's do it. Perfect. So weekly processes. Julia, I'll let you take the reins here, and I know that Brittany is going to jump in. One thing that's important to note is you go through the actual document itself. We were lucky to get support from one of the United States best e-commerce accounting / bookkeeping practices, as well as one of Canada's. So you'll notice here that certain tasks are specific to the US and others are specific to Canada. And we've made a note to kind of make the distinction between those two.
Yes, absolutely. The one thing as well, in Canada, a lot of the Canadian e-commerce sellers, by almost as a requirement, sell in the US as well. So even though it says US only, it may apply to you even as a Canadian accounting professional or a seller.
I think also one important thing to note, because there are some international attendees here, is that although there's a lot of things here that are specific to the 2 countries that we had mentioned, because a lot of these are universal to just solid business practices, I'd say like 80 to 90% of the checklist actually applies in pretty much any geography. So one thing that's important to note, this isn't only valuable for Canadians and Americans, but can be valuable for folks around the world.
Absolutely. And also, even though it's called an e-commerce bookkeeping checklist, there's a lot of stuff here that is absolutely valuable, even if you're not even in the e-commerce space. Mm-hmm. So we have designated things, if you'll see on the top right side, that are specific to the e-commerce channel. And then everything else would apply no matter what type of business that you have or that your clients have. So you can use this checklist for more than just your e-commerce clients. Okay, so and the other thing that we've done is these processes, and again, how many times we need another word for processes.
Tasks, checklists.
These processes would apply regardless of whether you're on a manual system, whether you're automated. We tried to kind of distinguish a little bit if you're doing something automated, but it works either way. So from the general bookkeeper controller standpoint, entering your inventory into your bills, and we're not going to go through every single item because then we would be here all day. We're going to kind of hit on some of the big touch points. As Brittany mentioned, inventory is a huge piece of e-commerce. So entering all your inventory bills, whether you're running it through your accounting system directly, through an inventory app, or even if you're doing it in Excel, you need to get all of those bills into your accounting system in one way or another. Entering in all the rest of your bills outside of the inventory. So these would be overhead expenses, insurance, advertising expenses outside of maybe what you're selling through e-commerce channels. Coding anything else that comes through your bank account or your credit card. So the top 3 items really are around getting your bills and your expenses. And sorry, that is my my ring telling me that someone is at my door. So I apologize for the technology bells. I've got all my focus turned off except for my ring. And then of course, after you've got all of your bills and your transactions and your bank account transactions entered, you're always going to have questions. That's invariably part of the bookkeeping process and dealing with clients, is you're going to have some kind of blanks where you have no idea what this is for. So you're going to send off your questions to your client. We recommend doing this weekly, and it's on our weekly checklist, because if you're sending it to them on a weekly basis, they're likely still going to remember what they spent that money on. You wait till the end of the month, end of the quarter, they're never going to remember. So it's certainly something that we recommend you do weekly. And then if you are, so those are the phase 1 items. Phase 2 would be introducing some automation where you're entering in those bills through some kind of automated app. You're collecting all the bills and all the source documents digitally somehow from your client and then pushing it across into QuickBooks or Xero. And then the e-commerce specific side of this is your sales side, where if you are using A2X, you want to push over all your sales from your multiple channels into your accounting software so that it matches the bank deposits that are coming into your bank account. As Brittany mentioned in her first couple of slides, where she had the 82,000 coming from Amazon, that's what you're trying to match. And either you're doing it manually, putting it in as one number of 82,000, which is the wrong way to do it, or you're breaking it out into the various items. And that's definitely where A2X can help. Anything you'd like to jump in that I've missed, Brittany?
Yeah, I'd like to just speak to really quick the phases and the reason why we're introducing this by way of phases. And it's because there's so much that could be done in an accounting department that sometimes people get lost in the nice to haves and they lose sight of the must haves. And there are certain things you do in accounting that literally keep your doors open, getting your bills paid, running your payroll, and that make a huge difference with the accuracy of the accounting, like using A2X to push over settlement activity, and other things that just help you answer questions or make life easier, or help you if you were to get audited, or you'll see as we track through, a lot of the advisory CFO stuff is level 3, because it's like, sure, KPIs would be so great, but if you're not even getting good, accurate data, the KPIs are useless, because you cannot dig in on data that's like garbage data creates garbage forecasting, creates garbage KPIs. So one of the reasons why we broke this into phases is to help you guys understand the most important things for you to tackle and to get right before you can ever build upon it. So that's why we introduced phases as part of all of this.
Perfect.
Awesome. So a few questions are actually starting to roll in. First and foremost, thank you, Naomi. Procedures as another word for process. So that's awesome. And
Great, thank you.
and one question from Jonathan, I think this is about two-way syncs, but inventory bills entered into QBO will update into the e-commerce platform, question mark. I'm not sure.
I think this was a follow-up question to, does A to X have a two-way sync with QBO? And to this, I would say, and you could probably, you're welcome to speak to this, Jeff, or I can answer this question if you want. I mean, you're the A to X expert, but I can answer.
Go ahead, and then I can jump in.
Yeah, so A to X's sync is primarily a pushing data into QuickBooks. It's not usually pulling data out, except for like classes and chart of accounts and stuff like that. So if you enter bills into QuickBooks, A to X is not going to pull those out. A to X's cost of goods sold process is a very streamlined, very right to the point of calculating COGS correctly, but it's certainly not a replacement to a full-blown inventory tool, and it's not trying to behave that way either. So it's primarily a one-way sync with QuickBooks, with pulling data out from QuickBooks to make it easier to do what you do in A to X.
Awesome. And there's a question here from Fran. Will A2X work with BigCommerce? That's a great question. And we're actually in the process of working on building an integration with BigCommerce. So that's super good news. If you want to be a part of potentially a beta group, Fran, if you can respond to one of the emails that are likely in your inbox and let me know, I'd be happy to take you on that process. But that's one of the neat things that we're currently in the process of working on. Great. So I'll move on to the next slide.
There was just one more question about holding people accountable to the processes that was a little bit higher up. I don't know how other firms do this, but for us, we implemented, like, everything that you're seeing right now that we're presenting could easily be dropped into something like Carbon or Asana or something that helps you track a process. So because we have all these items dropped into something like Asana lets us track like which items are completed, and we have a weekly deliverable reporting out that happens from our teams. So if they're behind on any of the tasks that are supposed to have been completed, they have to basically report out every week why they're behind on those tasks and what their plan is to basically get those tasks caught up. If it's a client communication problem, if it's an internal problem, if they're waiting on another team member. So that's all built into the task tracking software that we chose to work with and the dashboarding around it. But I'm sure everyone else has different approaches that they use.
We do something very similar to Brittany. All of the processes are actual tasks in our task management software. And again, part of the reason for that is so that our team doesn't forget. Not that it's meant to necessarily hold them accountable for everything, although that's important. It's that you want to make sure they don't forget, because there are so many different things that you have to think about and look at. And depending upon which channels your clients sell on, the things are sometimes a little bit different. So for them not to have to remember, okay, this is a Shopify client, but their Shopify payment methods are this, here's what I have to do, versus this client also selling on Shopify, but has different payment methods, has a different process. So as important as it is for it to be accountable, it's also so that they don't forget and that things don't fall through the cracks.
That's a really good point. I'd love to hear Joe's perspective on accountability, because I'm sure that tons of practices that are implementing Carbon have this question. And also it probably ties right back with usage, right? Like how do they ensure that people are actually following the process in Carbon as well?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely accurate. I mean, just that point of efficiency and profitability, the sheer remembering, what was this channel? Did they add a channel? Which legal pad did I have it on? Oh shoot, that legal pad's at the office and I'm working from home. There's an immense amount of time that's lost just in that process, the process of finding your process, of how bad the process actually is. So drinking game, go ahead. That was like 4. So yeah, I mean, that having, I'm trying not to say process again, but it's very difficult. Procedures. Yeah, having it listed out. I mean, Google Sheet is rather primitive, but it is cloud I've heard Asana, other task management tools. From a carbon perspective, having it there allows you to hold the team accountable and for the team to be accountable to themselves. I mean, the worst thing you want to do is burn out a key player because you don't know how much work they're doing, or you have a player that's not really doing much and they could be doing more. So you're failing to highlight, encourage, and give raises to your key player, and you are losing efficiency and profitability on a low player. Speaking from the carbon perspective and a user of carbon, I used it since 2016. I've been on the platform for a while. That level of accountability of creating reporting, like Brittany was mentioning with Asana, is invaluable so that you can see which team members are doing what, are they overloaded, and is it getting done on time? It's one thing to have your procedures or your task list there. It's another thing to have the visibility to, well, did we get it all done on time? So it's great to say, yeah, we need to do sales tax by the 20th, but if I have no way of reporting on if it got done or not, then I have no way of meeting with that team member to get it done. Or if I'm the one doing the work myself as a smaller firm, just to have that visibility, because there's a billion things going on between the world and family and kids and who knows what, that we ourselves are prone to just totally miss something if it's not written down and we don't have that visibility. So I'd say that reporting piece and the visibility piece is the cherry on top of the procedures. If you don't have that, then it's not a very tasty ice cream sundae. That's a horrible analogy, but you get where I'm
Great analogy. Awesome. Cool. So there are a few more questions rolling in, but we can keep them to the end so that we can start to get through the process a little bit more. And then please keep asking them. We'll make sure to answer as many as possible by the end of the actual webinar. So Juliet, I'll pass the mic back to you to the next phase of the weekly process.
Sure. The other thing I want to mention, and I don't think that we've mentioned this so far, as to how this checklist can also serve you as a bookkeeping or accounting professional, is there's going to be some terminology that's in here that's specific to e-commerce. There's going to be some items that are very specific to e-commerce. It's a great way of showing your value to potential clients as to whether or not, have you asked is your bookkeeper doing this, and asking very specific questions around the e-commerce bookkeeping space that the client may not even know that that's something that they needed to think about. But if you're able to bring it forth and they're interviewing a bunch of bookkeepers or a bunch of bookkeeping firms, they may also ask that question to someone else and they may not know, and it absolutely raises you up in expertise and value that you can bring.
It's an awesome.
So that's certainly something else that you can use this checklist for.
This was one of the most powerful parts of niching here in e-commerce, was that initially when we were meeting with clients where we didn't know their industry deeply, we didn't really know what we were walking into, and we kind of had to rely on the client to present us with what their complexities were going to be and their ugly monsters in the closet. But as we got into the e-commerce space, we could show the clients we actually understood their business better than they did, because we asked questions that demonstrated our knowledge, just like Juliet just said. And it ended up being value adding to them, even to just go through a sales process with us, because we were able to bring things to their attention that they hadn't even considered. And that is the real power of e-commerce accounting. And I don't think we can really overemphasize what Juliet just said, how valuable it is as an accounting firm to have detailed descriptions about what a good e-commerce accounting firm would be doing. Because if you read this and you're like, I have no idea what this is talking about, it gives you total guidance on where you need to further your education and what you need to continue to learn and how you need to grow in order to really serve this space. It's like a roadmap for your own process if you're new to this whole thing.
Yeah, and one thing that I'll add, and to a certain extent plug, for those of you that don't know, Ledger Gurus, so the organization that Brittany is the CEO of, does have Ledger Gurus University with courses on different areas of the e-commerce accounting / bookkeeping space. So it's at the end of this presentation, but I'll also make sure to have it in the follow-up email, so that if you want to check it out, you'll have access to those awesome resources.
Thank you, Jeff. That's very nice of you.
One thing I just wanted to plug real quick, Jeff, is to Juliet's point, asking your bookkeeper to review this checklist and ensure they're doing it. From an accounting bookkeeper's perspective, when you talk about value pricing, sharing some of this with the potential client, like, just so you know, like, this is what our firm is going to be doing for you. It's a lot of freaking work to keep you compliant on all those 6 things that you mentioned. It's very comprehensive. So I would use it as a sales tool.
Another awesome tip. We don't even have that in the slides, but I love that one. That's a great one.
Okay, so let's jump into the weekly processes, because I'm not even sure we're at the speed we're going that we're even going to make it through to the monthly one. So we're going to do these a little bit more higher level to make sure that we can get to the questions as well, because everyone is going to get these, the recording as well as the checklists themselves. So on the weekly processes, one of the things, the biggest pain point for e-commerce businesses, as we've already said, is inventory. So you need to have some really specific steps. Again, either yourself, if you're managing inventory for your clients, or making sure that your client is doing it internally somewhere, is making sure that they know how much inventory they have, when do they need to reorder, have they reordered, are there seasons that their product is going to be in higher demand, and preparing for that. Being able to track a lot of inventory manufacturers require deposits up front before they will start producing any of the inventory. And sometimes a lag time between that initial $10,000 or $20,000 deposit and the inventory being shipped can be months at a time, and being able to track that for your clients as to, yes, you've made prepayments already on this inventory, but you're not going to get it for months down the road. So being aware of tracking the prepayments that have been done. And then again, making sure that they have an accurate inventory count of what they have available to sell, that it's not driven by when they actually get a bill from the manufacturer, but what do they physically have in the warehouse? Or if they have multiple warehouses, which warehouse has the inventory that you need to sell? So being able to give some insight on the products that they're selling, where they're located, how much they have, so that they don't have all these sales but nothing to fulfill them with, is a big part of the value add that you can do. Anything you want to add, Brittany?
Yeah, I mean, and inventory will be, if you guys dive into the e-commerce accounting, inventory will be by far the most complex part of the entire picture that you deal with. And that's just unavoidable. We've been deeply involved in inventory for 4 years now, and we are still in the process of completely redefining everything we do on a constant basis. And it's also your client's biggest pain point too. This is their largest asset, the most important asset. This is what keeps their business alive, and they really want and need visibility into this. But this is like the proverbial sock in the dryer. Like, I put 2 socks in, why did only 1 sock come out? Nobody has an explanation for this. And so like, it's just going to be painful. Just wipe each other's tears and carry on. Like, it's just going to be hard.
And I think as important as it is for us to tell you what it is that you have to do to provide e-commerce bookkeeping services, I think it's as important for us to be honest about what the challenges are that you'll encounter. And inventory absolutely is one of them. And you'll notice on this sheet that number 7, it's a phase 2 item, which is allocate landed costs across SKUs. That is a huge pain. It's so vitally important to an e-commerce seller as to what that landed cost is for a particular product, but it's not an easy task to be able to calculate.
Right. And one of the things that A2X does offer, I just have to plug this really quick, is their approach to cost of goods sold is really solid as a really good starting point into this process. So if you are new to this process, one of the huge benefits of A2X is that it invites you to establish a product cost catalog based on a matrix of just what the SKUs are, and then it calculates your cost of goods sold for you based on what it can see passing through your channels in sales and quantity. And as far as a fundamental beginning step, I know clients, we have clients that are doing several $1 million a year who are still relying on that basic accounting process. It simplifies it in all the right ways while still getting the most important pieces right. So there are definitely things you can do to ease into this. But if you get into inventory and you want to cry yourself to sleep and leave the country, and again, you lose your will to live, like you're in good company, and your clients are exactly the same way.
Okay, you're just going to scare them all away, Brittany.
I know,
Exactly,
but
making it sound
it's
so fun.
lovely. It's fun too. E-commerce accounting is great, guys.
Well, it makes it interesting, right? Like sometimes a lot of these tasks can be a little bit more manual, administrative in nature, but what you're describing is like a ridiculous amount of problem solving.
Well, and some of them are very easy to nail, like payroll. Payroll is very straightforward. Like, do these tasks correctly, but like it's going to be really easy to just go through and nail most of these. If you find yourself struggling with just nailing what we're laying out in inventory, it's because it's complex and hard. And maybe focus on some other pieces while you build up your expertise in that area.
Awesome. Naomi asked a question that's like very, very on point with what we're talking about right now. What apps are good for tracking inventory at this level of detail? Sounds beyond basic QBO. Is this part of what A2X does? So
sure. I can start with what we use. So we use Deer Inventory. If they are looking for that level of complexity, landed costs, etc., then it's through Deer Inventory. QBO can't handle it, definitely not. And as Brittany said, A2X doesn't handle inventory with landed costs and quantities, but it will give you matching of your sales and your cost of goods sold to give you gross profitability numbers as a really solid starting point.
Yeah, and our clients are on about 8 different tools. Deer, Finale, we're still shedding tears over the Locate acquisition by Xero. SOS Inventory, they're kind of across the board. We support the inventory tools right now that our clients bring in the door, but that's part of what we're trying to change right now. Is we're trying to be able to support our clients through implementation and tool success, basically, which is not something we've done up to this point in time. But starting with a really solid product cost catalog, and then using that product cost catalog to multiply cost of goods sold based on the quantity of what you see selling by SKU on the channels is a very solid place to start this process, and significantly better than the default, which is to expense all inventory at the time that it's purchased. And that is exactly what A2X helps with, is that specific process I just described.
It's a really good point too. Like more and more inventory apps are popping up every single day. It's probably one of the biggest categories in the space that I've seen up to this point. Love the idea of aligning on like what are the right tools for your clients and ensuring that they're successful on them, especially if inventory is such a huge pain point in the first place.
Yeah, right.
Well, it's a make or break pain point for an e-commerce seller as to whether or not they're making money. What do if you're not calculating all your costs properly and you don't know what your profit margins are, you don't know what to fix. So absolutely.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay, so the other lovely part of e-commerce bookkeeping, and that was really heavy on the sarcasm. I think this is worse than inventory, personally.
Right.
It's sales tax.
Right. Certainly riskier. It's riskier, that's for sure.
It's riskier, and in the US, it's so much more complex than it is in Canada. Again, in Canada, you've got provinces, and every province has, and we've jumped ahead. Okay. In Canada, it's pretty straightforward. You still have provincial thresholds that you need to be able to track, but it's nothing at all like it is with Nexus in the US. And I'm going to let you run with this one, Brittany, because I can't talk to Nexus. So I'll let you run with this one.
Yeah. So, and I mean, Juliet's right, because sales tax is not only complex, but it is risky. And the reason why is because if you get your inventory wrong, nobody's going to be throwing you in jail. However, with sales tax, there is a risk involved because there are certain things you can do in sales tax that will actually expose you legally to prosecution. And one of those is collecting in states that you're not actually prepared to remit in. So like the worst thing you could do is just turn on your channels to collect in every state. We see clients do that all the time because they're afraid of, oh my gosh, I need to be collecting, I'm just going to turn it on in every state. Bad idea, because that is like, that's risking jail versus like other things. So not to scare you, let me back up. This is also one, you will all succeed. We are all here for you. We are all in this together. but just be aware. Don't
This is
turn
how Brittany lands the sales. You could go to jail if you don't use us.
It's fraud. Yeah. So don't turn on your channels to collect in every single state. Be deliberate about where you're going to register, what state you're going to develop a relationship with. There are definitely Nexus rules. Those are beyond the scope of this particular webinar. Actually, we do Ledger. Let me just plug this really quick. Ledger Gurus does have a free webinar on our website that's an hour long that goes through all of the must-know rules and tactics and techniques for sales tax. If you go to our course page, it's like the first one that just says like something about everything you need to know about sales tax. That's a free webinar, and it's about an hour long, and it will go through all of that stuff that will keep you out of the blanker.
I'll add it to the follow-up.
What was that, Jeff?
I'll add it to the follow-up. Make sure that everyone has access to it.
Yeah. But after you kind of get your handle on what's going on, you know, the nice thing about Nexus in the United States is it's pretty straightforward after you kind of know what you're doing. Collect, remit, collect, remit, collect, remit. But wrapping your head around it when you're new to it can be a little bit terrifying, but doable. And there's great tools in this space now that support sales tax as well, which also makes it a lot easier as well.
And I think that the other thing, and I think I mentioned this near the beginning of the webinar, is that most business owners struggle with sales tax, whether it's provincial or in Canada or in the US, with just having their business in one location and selling in just that one location. That you add on all the complexity of selling across different states, provinces, and countries. A lot of our, I think almost all of our clients don't only sell in Canada, they sell in the UK and they sell in the US as well. That they need help. They absolutely need help. And they're going to be looking to you to get that help.
Absolutely. And to not go to jail.
And not go to jail.
we should all just agree that that could be a unified goal of this group of people.
So on the payroll side of the weekly processes, I guess one other thing to mention on the sales tax, why it's a weekly process. Again, it's to just make sure for our clients, what we want to do is we want to give them real-time bookkeeping. That's what's most important to them, is you don't want to leave all the tax stuff for the end of the month when you have to file, or if you're a quarterly filer, or if you're an annual filer, they'll make huge swings to your numbers. So you don't want to leave it all to the end to deal with, which is why it's on a weekly process. And again, another plug for A2X. They do a great job of separating out the sales tax collected across the channels into the right accounts onto your balance sheet for you to be able to do your filings.
It's our new messaging. A2X, don't go to jail.
Perfect.
I want royalty rights to that tagline, Jeff.
Trademark it. So on the payroll side, we're not going to spend any time on the payroll side. It's pretty standard for e-commerce bookkeeping versus any other general bookkeeping. You have a copy of the checklist, process list, procedures list. You have a copy of it. You can go through the payroll list. So if you want to jump onto the next one, Jeff.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're having, just as a heads up, a few people jump off. So thank you so much for joining us, and they're letting us know that they're excited for the recording. We will be sending the recording with all the resources that we're discussing in the actual webinar. So if you have to jump off, thanks so much for joining. If not, stay on board. I probably have another, I'd say like 10 minutes, and then everyone can get on with their day. So I'm just going to go to the next slide. Perfect.
Okay, so now we're going to get into some weekly processes that are around not necessarily general bookkeeping, but some CFO and strategic functions. Cash forecasting, as I talked about, even on the inventory and purchasing side, it can be huge for an e-commerce seller because they need to put deposits up front to purchase their inventory or manufacture their inventory and don't see any result from that until they actually get it 3 months or 4 months down the road. And with supply chain issues right now, we're seeing it even take longer than that. So thinking about putting some cash forecasting into place for your clients can be fairly important. And as well with inventory, when you can predict what they're going to need down the road, then you can backtrack that. And when do I need to order it to make sure I have the inventory so I'm not selling stuff and my customers are waiting at the other end. Those are probably as phase one, some of the things that you want to look at from a strategic standpoint. I'm going to jump to the last one, which is review and calculate KPIs. So some of the KPIs, I'm going to mention the two most popular that our clients are asking for. Maybe Brittany, you can share any that you find your clients are asking for. One is, which is my most profitable channel and region? If you're selling on Amazon Canada, US, UK, Australia, is there a difference between what region I'm selling on? So which channel? Amazon, Shopify, Etsy, Walmart. Again, where am I making the most money? And then also, what is my most profitable product? If they've got a wide range of SKUs, what are the products that are most profitable for me? If I've got some advertising dollars, where do I throw it and what do I throw it behind?
And probably I would add to those that are one of ours that Juliet hasn't already mentioned is, what kind of return am I getting on my ad spend? And is this agency I just hired like doing good or just sucking money out of my business? So ad spend is another one that we get a lot of questions about, which incidentally is another reason why we decided to buy an e-commerce business, because that's a hard one to answer when all you're seeing is the financial information, but you don't understand how the ad spend is happening and how the marketing is happening and how those dollars are converting and all that kind of stuff. And it was very hard for us to answer those questions effectively when we were only seeing financials numbers come in. So, but that's another one that we get questions about all the time, even if we kind of have to shrug our shoulders and say, we don't know. Not for long. Yeah.
And Naomi is not optimistic that we're going to be done in 10 minutes.
I saw it. She's like, we shall see. Oh, the challenge is on the floor for Naomi's sake.
Okay. Well, theoretically, we don't even have 10 minutes now because she posted that at 4:03. So.
Okay.
I feel good about it. I think we're going to be good.
Feel good about it? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was kind of a deep dive into the weekly processes. We're not going through that in extensive of a conversation about the monthly, but we wanted to highlight some of the monthly e-commerce processes that are just specific to e-commerce. So in the checklist document, you will have all the payables, the receivables, payroll, sales tax, etc. But we're just focusing on one section that we've pulled out. And more than anything else, we wanted to talk about these because these add a whole different layer of complexity that you don't necessarily see in a typical Ledger Guru's AIS solutions type of business. Pulling the sales channels from the sales activity and fees and summarizing them into the accounting system. If you think back again to that first slide that Brittany had, where it was the 82,000 of Amazon on one side and then all that list of transactions that made up that 82,000, being able to break that out properly into your accounting software, A2X, phenomenal, does that for you. And it matches, if you are using QBO, it matches that 82,000 in your bank feed, and then there's a zillion transactions that are taking place behind it. You can do it daily, you can do it weekly. We usually, at a minimum, if you're doing it manually, you want to do it monthly at a minimum. For us, if you're using A2X, it's based on settlement. And so every time an amount goes into your bank, there's already the transactions that have come across from A2X, which is so powerful, gives you real-time, again, financials throughout the month. That's probably one of the biggest ones for us, is pulling in the activity from the sales channel. If your client is selling across multiple sales channels and you don't have a tool like A2X, you're actually logging into every single channel. If they're selling across different regions, every single region, and downloading the reports, and then having that 1 million Excel spreadsheet that Brittany explained at the beginning.
I've never heard of anyone breaking an Excel sheet. That's totally new to me.
Well, you used to have to, right? Because the sheet that Amazon gives you to tell you where you're supposed to put things is pretty much useless. It doesn't give you a lot of information.
Yeah.
True.
So that's one of the major e-commerce processes that you do monthly, but then you have to reconcile your payment processor reports to your accounting system. Again, this is listed as a phase 2 item because very few e-commerce businesses will do this. And it takes time. And that's why we've listed it as a phase 2, because most businesses aren't even going to be looking for this. So if you can do it and you can offer it, extra value add for you right off the bat. Okay, so I will turn it over to you, Brittany, so that we actually get through this in 10 minutes, which we're not going to.
Okay.
Naomi was right, we're not.
This is probably one of the single greatest things A2X has done for us in making our business more scalable is this process right here. Because before we were using A2X routinely, this is what made e-commerce accounting so complex for us, was every single client walked in the door with different payment processors, and the back-end reporting was different on every single client, where you found the reports, the capabilities that each reports had, the way we had to sort out the data. Like every single channel introduced a new complex process, which we then had to spread out across our organization to try to scale. It's a lot easier for us to teach our people how to utilize A2X for Walmart and Shopify and Amazon than it is for us to teach them how to go in on the back end, pull the reports, sort out the data, make the journal entries, reconcile it all. It's very, very, very complex. This has made our organization much more scalable, which I appreciate greatly. Before this, it was painful. I know I talk a lot about pain, but hopefully you guys also feel the solutions that we're also pointing you to. I'm just saying, learn from my mistakes, learn from my pain, introduce right out the gate some of the tools that it took us several years to find, and avoid some of my tears. Yeah.
It's funny, Joe on the software side talks about Sundays, and Brittany on the e-commerce accounting side talks about pain.
The other thing that I want to mention, and it's important in Canada, I don't know if it is as much in the US, is point number 6, which is exchange variances. We hit that a lot in Canada, especially because so many of our sellers are selling in the US as well, that your payment clearing accounts don't always clear out because of the exchange difference. So you just want to make sure that you are adjusting for those. And again, it's listed as a phase 2 item because we've had so many clients come to us with a previous bookkeeper or bookkeeping firm or the business owner doing it, and they've never cleared out. Their payment clearing account is never cleared because of the exchange variance. So you want to make sure that that's something you're doing as well.
And it's an example of something that doesn't make or break whether the doors of your business stay open. It's more about like, how accurate are your books? And that's the other reason why it's a phase 2, is because you can get 95% of the way there without taking this step. Therefore, and this is a complex step to master, therefore, master the other things before you try something like this one.
Definitely. Okay, I think we're done.
So
we're
really,
now turning it over to the process side and Joe's expertise.
Let's do it. And if you're in the chat, you'll see a real trippy message from me. It's not from me. I don't know where that came from, but thank you for the story. We can get to it a little bit later. Joe, passing the mic. Oh, sorry. Before we do that, just to make mention that this checklist is available, as mentioned, as a PDF, customizable Google Sheet. And we've also been working with the Carbon team, if you are already using Carbon, to access it as a template within Carbon's template library, and just transfer that over into your account so that you can start to customize it and execute against it in your own way. And then, Joe, did you just want to talk about the Carbon template library for 2 seconds, and then we can get to the best practices?
Yeah. So for any Carbon users, we have a global Carbon template library that was created by users of ours as well as employees of ours, that you can go up to the Carbon template library and just add it directly to your Carbon account. So we are working on having this actual amazing checklist converted into a Carbon template. You just go grab and use, which is pretty cool. And then there's obviously all of the other processes you might use in your firm. You can go grab those, add them to your account as well.
Awesome. Great. All right. So after supporting thousands of practices and helping them implement tools for them to instrument their processes, you've obviously come out of it with a lot of best practices that I'm sure that everyone here is going to find useful. So I'd love for you to go through them, Joe, and then Brittany and Juliet, if you want to add color or some anecdotes about how you experienced it yourself at your own practices.
Yeah, for sure. As I've looked through the actual tasks that Brittany and Juliet put together, it's very comprehensive. It's very well done. As I think through like next steps from the process side itself, not necessarily this webinar, but from the process, is don't just blindly take these and try to implement. For anyone that's going to be working with this task list, whether it's yourself, employees, or ownership, is to make sure everyone understands what it is. So the last thing you want to do is give an instruction and someone says, yeah, sure, I got it, and they have no idea what they're doing. You want to make sure there's true ownership from all parties. Yes, I understand what that task is telling you to do. So that's the main thing, is to make it your own, convert the language into your firm's language and content and culture. Don't just blindly receive a process without reviewing it and optimizing it yourself. Another thought is it's firm specific. So if you're scaling like crazy, I mean, Brittany going from 0 to 60 employees in that short amount of time, that is incredible. A firm like hers is going to want more granularity in the tasks because they have lots of new hires coming in. They've got people moving and promoting. So she's going to want to have more detail in the checklist so that's easier to follow, like a step-by-step instruction manual of sorts. If you are a more owner-operator type, or you're a bookkeeper within an organization, you can generally get by with a little bit less detail because there's a little bit more intellectual property. So that's just one thing to think of. I generally lean more towards make it a manual, make it very comprehensive. And if it's someone that's been on the account for a while, they don't have to read the whole description of the task. They just know what they're doing. So that's another thing to think about. And then the ambiguity side is every task needs an owner. So you don't want to have no owners, and you don't want to have 2 owners on the same task. You don't want to assign the role of sales tax to 2 people because it's not going to get done. So you want to be very clear. There's a very clear baton pass. Joe, I will do payroll every week. No one else will until I give that baton to somebody else. So making sure it's very, very clear. Those other 3, I'll skim by. It's just best practice about how to get that adoption across. And then as you've built out a checklist, people know how it's working. This is an awesome opportunity to leverage technology. So the team is real clear. We need to do things on these specific days to accomplish the mission. This task takes a heck of a lot of time on that list. What can we do? And that's where A2X is a wonderful technology as you think through. Reconcile the channel activity to the bank account. Oh my gosh, team, this is a million lines in Excel and it breaks all the time. That's an A2X task. We get all that profitability, all that goodness within the context of the existing checklist. So build the checklist, get the ownership, and then start talking through time, whether it's technology like A2X or it's team members, very expensive, high quality team member doing a very low quality task. That's an opportunity for an intern or a new hire to come in and do that work. So those are our best practices around the tasks, and then how I'd recommend taking that wonderful checklist and making it your own.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Joe. Brittany and Juliet, anything that you want to add from first person experience?
I would again like to just say, don't be me, embrace the processes, build it into your firm right from the very beginning, and leverage that technology right from the beginning to make your life easier and things more profitable.
Absolutely. And I think the only thing I would add, what we've learned is that the person who is actually working on the client or doing the work still has so much that's in their head that they think they've documented it, that they don't necessarily document everything that they take for granted. So have someone document the process and then have someone else follow the process, and you'll find the gaps of what's been missed.
Great advice. Really.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Cool. All right. Thanks, team. Just going to jump into the next one. So we're at the Q&A section. So we did it a little over 10 minutes, not too much. But I'm just going to go back. I think or did we cover all the questions? I think we might have covered all the questions as we went along. Brittany or Juliet, did you see any that I might have missed?
I don't think so. I think we were getting most of them as we went along.
There was one question I saw about whether or not our firms are hiring. Our website just has a page that shows all the open listings that we currently have. That's just one question I saw. And I just want to tell Naomi, thank you for her kind comments about our bookkeeping checklist being a thing of beauty. This was a really fun collaboration. A2X is my favorite partner and Juliet is my favorite human. So it was really fun to collaborate on this.
Speaking of
Brittany
which,
and I we're just friends, Brittany.
Oh, that's right.
Just
And
please put me in there.
Joe's a salty, great guy.
Just kidding.
I'll just make sure that I'll send all the resources that we discussed in this webinar. There are a ton, and luckily it's because of individuals like Brittany and Juliet and Joe that are so incredibly generous with their time. I think ultimately, when you think about it, like, these are all individuals that are supporting sellers, doing a webinar for other accountants and bookkeepers supporting sellers, really embracing, I think, the ethos and mantra of rising tides raise all ships. So I just want to say, Brittany and Juliet and Joe, thank you so incredibly much. This is an incredible asset that I think is going to get a lot of play. And it's just been wonderful collaborating with all of you. And I hope all of you that have joined us, I just want to thank you as well, got some value out of the webinar. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me directly, and then I will direct those questions accordingly to the experts here. So thanks again so much. Really appreciate it, and hope everyone has a wonderful day. Unless there's anything else that anyone wants to add, or I'm going to sign off for now.
Looking forward to calling around with you in Florida next week, Joe. Sorry to forget you in my.
I'm totally kidding.
So
Great to see you all.
Yeah, and I'll just leave everyone on this one last note. Don't go to jail. So there you go. Thanks, everyone. Chat soon.